I watched Marcus freeze mid-sentence at the charity gala, his champagne flute suspended halfway to his lips, as the MC announced my name as the evening's keynote speaker and primary donor. The color drained from his face, that same face that had once told me my natural curls made me look unprofessional and unkempt. Beside him, his new wife, Serena, shifted uncomfortably in her knockoff gown, and I savored the moment like aged wine. This wasn't our first encounter since my death and rebirth, but it was the first time I'd allowed them to see exactly how far I'd risen. My hair, now permanently straightened with the best treatments money could buy, fell in a sleek curtain down my back. Not because I believed their cruel words, but because every time I looked in the mirror, the smooth strands reminded me of my rebirth, my second chance, my promise to myself that they would never hurt me again. The irony wasn't lost on me. In my previous life, I'd died at 28 on the bathroom floor of our apartment, a bottle of sleeping pills beside me, after discovering Marcus had been embezzling from my family's company while cheating on me with my half-sister. In this life, at 26, I stood on a stage in a custom Valentino gown, about to announce a $50 million donation to the Children's Hospital, the same hospital where I'd been pronounced dead 2 years ago, before waking up in my 21-year-old body with every devastating memory intact. The first time I truly understood I was unloved was at 14, though the seeds had been planted much earlier. My mother, Catherine, had remarried when I was 6, 2 years after my father's death in a car accident. Richard Ashford brought with him money, connections, and Serena, his daughter from his first marriage. Serena was everything I wasn't. Blonde where I was dark, willowy where I was curved, and, most importantly, she had perfectly straight hair that never frizzed in humidity or required hours of painful brushing. "Why can't you look more like your sister?" My mother would sigh, running her hands through Serena's golden locks while I sat nearby, trying to detangle my own curls with a brush that seemed designed to cause maximum pain. But it wasn't just about hair. It was about everything. Serena got riding lessons. I got library books from the discount bin. Serena got a sweet 16 at the country club. I got a cake from the grocery store and dinner at chain restaurant. When we both applied to Northwestern, Serena's application was professionally edited and polished. Mine was something I cobbled together between shifts at the coffee shop I'd taken on to save for application fees my mother said we couldn't afford, despite the new Mercedes she'd just bought Serena for her 17th birthday. I got in on a full scholarship. Serena didn't get in at all. That was when the real hatred began. My mother never forgave me for succeeding where her stepdaughter had failed. "You've always been so selfish," she told me the day I left for college. "So focused on yourself, never thinking about how your success makes Serena feel." At Northwestern, I met Marcus Chen at a business fraternity mixer during my sophomore year. He was a senior, charismatic and ambitious, with a smile that made me forget about my family's coldness. For the first time in my life, someone chose me. Someone wanted me. When he said my curls were beautiful and wild and free, I believed him. When he said he loved me, I believed that too. We dated for 3 years. He proposed the week after I graduated, and I said yes without hesitation. My mother actually seemed pleased. Marcus came from a wealthy family, and his father owned a successful import-export business. For once, I thought I'd done something right in her eyes. I was wrong. The criticism started small. "Have you thought about straightening your hair for the wedding? It photographs better." Then it grew. "Clients might take you more seriously with a more polished look." Finally, "Your hair is just so messy, unprofessional. Can't you just try to look put together?" This from the man who'd once said my curls were beautiful. But I was so desperate to be loved, to be wanted, to prove to my mother that I was worthy of being chosen, that I started straightening my hair. Every morning I'd spend an hour with the flat iron, chemicals, treatments. My curls, my beautiful, natural curls that my late father had loved, that he'd called my crown, became a memory. Marcus's criticism didn't stop there. My clothes were too casual. My laugh was too loud. I worked too much. I didn't understand his needs. The man I'd fallen in love with became a stranger who chipped away at me piece by piece until I barely recognized myself. Meanwhile, Serena had moved back home after dropping out of her third college. She was working as a social media influencer, which meant taking pictures of herself in expensive clothes my mother bought her while contributing nothing to the household. When Richard died suddenly of a heart attack during my engagement, he left everything to my mother, who immediately began funneling money to Serena's lifestyle. I had inherited my father's company, Hartley Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing firm that he'd built from nothing. It had been held in trust until I turned 25. When I took over, Marcus insisted on being made CFO. "We're partners," he said, "in everything." I said yes. I always said yes to Marcus. In my first life, that decision killed me. Within 2 years of our marriage, I discovered Marcus had been systematically embezzling from Hartley Industries, hiding his theft behind complex shell corporations and fraudulent contracts. The company was hemorrhaging money, and I was on the verge of bankruptcy. When I confronted him, he laughed. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Report your own husband? Admit you were stupid enough to let this happen? Your mother already thinks you're incompetent. This will just prove it." That's when I found the texts on his phone, hundreds of them going back years, all to Serena. My half-sister and my husband had been having an affair since our engagement. They'd laughed about me, mocked my attempts to be beautiful for him, shared intimate details of my insecurities. "She's so desperate for approval," one text read. "It's actually sad." The worst part? My mother knew. There was a thread between the three of them, planning their future after I inevitably failed at running the company. They were going to let Hartley Industries collapse, buy the assets for pennies, and rebuild it together. I was just an obstacle to be removed. I filed for divorce. Marcus fought it viciously, claiming he deserved half of everything, including Hartley Industries. My lawyer said we could win, but it would take years and cost millions. The stress was unbearable. The company was failing. I was failing. And through it all, my mother's voice echoed in my head. "You've always been so selfish, so focused on yourself." On a rainy Tuesday in October, I swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills and went to sleep for what I thought would be the last time. Instead, I woke up in my 21-year-old body, 3 days after my birthday, 7 years before my death, with every memory of my previous life burning in my mind like a brand. The first thing I did was cry for 3 days straight. The second thing I did was cut my hair into a short bob and get a keratin treatment to straighten what remained. If I had to look at my curls, the ones Marcus would eventually use as a weapon against me, I wouldn't survive the second chance with my sanity intact. The third thing I did was make a plan. I was 21, just graduated from Northwestern, and about to start working at Hartley Industries as a junior executive while the company remained in trust for 4 more years. In my previous life, this was when I'd met Marcus at that business fraternity mixer. This time, when the invitation came, I threw it away. Instead, I focused on learning everything I could about the company my father had built. I shadowed the current CEO, a man named Harold Chen, no relation to Marcus, and absorbed every detail of our operations, our clients, our vulnerabilities. Harold was 65 and planning to retire when I turned 25 and took over. He was honest, thorough, and he'd known my father well. "Your dad would be proud of you," he told me once. "You've got his head for business and his heart for people." I wanted to believe him, but my mother's voice was always there, whispering that I wasn't good enough. The first real test came 6 months into my rebirth. My mother called me into her office. She'd taken an office at Hartley Industries, despite having no role in the company, a red flag I'd missed in my first life, and told me she'd invited some people to dinner. "Marcus Chen and his family," she said brightly. "His father does business with several of our suppliers, and I thought it would be good for you to network. Plus, he's very handsome and accomplished." My blood ran cold, so it wasn't a chance meeting at a mixer. My mother had orchestrated our introduction. "No," I said simply. Her face transformed from pleasant to furious in an instant. "Excuse me?" I said no, I'm not interested in meeting him. "Don't be difficult, Elizabeth. This is a professional obligation." "Then you go to dinner with them. I have other plans." I'd never said no to my mother before, not in either life. The shock on her face was almost worth the screaming match that followed, in which she called me ungrateful, selfish, and a disappointment. When I didn't back down, she played her trump card. "Your father would be ashamed of you." In my first life, those words would have destroyed me. In this life, I had the perspective of hindsight. My father would be ashamed of you, I said quietly, for what you let Richard and Serena do to this family, for how you treated his daughter, for forgetting that he built Hartley Industries for me, not for your new family to plunder. I walked out of her office and didn't speak to her for 3 months. During that time, I made my first major move. I hired a private investigator to look into Marcus Chen. What I discovered was illuminating. In my previous timeline, Marcus's father's import-export business was legitimate. In this timeline, it still was. But Marcus himself had been expelled from his previous position at a different company for financial irregularities. Nothing had been proven, but the whispers were there. More importantly, I discovered Marcus already knew Serena. They'd met at some society function 2 years ago and had kept in touch. In my previous life, I'd thought their affair started after our engagement, but the investigators' photos showed them having coffee together, laughing, his hand on her arm. The affair had been going on for years before I'd even met him. My mother had set me up with a man who was already involved with my half-sister. She'd served me up like a lamb to slaughter, a convenient source of money and legitimacy for her preferred daughter's boyfriend. The rage I felt was incandescent, but I channeled it into strategy. I couldn't avoid Marcus forever. My mother was relentless, and the Chicago business community was too small. When we finally crossed paths at a company event, I was ready. "Elizabeth," my mother said, her hand tight on my elbow, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Chen. His family does business with several of our suppliers." Marcus extended his hand with that charming smile I'd once fallen for. "It's a pleasure to meet you." I shook his hand briefly, my expression neutral. "Mr. Chen, I've heard a lot about your family's business." I turned to my mother. Although I should mention, Harold and I have been reviewing our supplier contracts. We're considering consolidating to improve our margins. Several of our current arrangements are no longer cost-effective. My mother's smile tightened. The Chen family business wasn't a direct supplier, but they acted as a middleman for 3 of our largest material orders. Cutting them out would save Hartley Industries a significant amount of money and eliminate any leverage my mother thought she had over me. "That seems premature," my mother said. "These are long-standing relationships." "Which is exactly why they need review," I replied pleasantly. "Market conditions change. We need to adapt or die." I smiled at Marcus. "I'm sure you understand, Mr. Chen. Business is business." The look he gave me was sharp, calculating. This wasn't the naive girl he'd expected. Good. I excused myself and spent the rest of the evening avoiding them both. But I could feel Marcus watching me, reassessing. In my previous life, he'd seen an insecure girl desperate for love. In this life, I was giving him nothing to work with. 3 days later, Serena called me for the first time in months. "Mom says you're being difficult about some business thing," she said. "You should really reconsider. The Chens are important connections." "I'm making the best decisions for Hartley Industries," I said. "That's my job." "Your job is to not embarrass this family," Serena snapped. "God, you're so selfish. This is exactly why nobody likes you, Elizabeth. You think you're so special because Daddy left you his company, but you're just a spoiled brat who got lucky." The words were designed to hurt, and in my first life they would have. But I'd lived through worse. I'd lived through her affair with my husband, through my own suicide, through waking up with the knowledge that everyone I'd loved had betrayed me. "If me doing my job embarrasses you," I said calmly, "that sounds like a personal problem." I hung up before she could respond. The consolidation of our supplier contracts took 6 months and saved Hartley Industries $3 million annually. Harold was impressed enough to give me a promotion and a significant raise. My mother was furious but couldn't argue with the results. Marcus and his family's business took a hit, and while they didn't go under, they were significantly weakened. It was my first real victory, and it tasted like freedom. But I knew it wasn't enough. In my previous life, Marcus had gotten to me through love, making me feel wanted, special, chosen. When I'd refused that opening, he'd need another angle, and there was only one other thing I had that he wanted: control of Hartley Industries. The trust that held my inheritance had one significant vulnerability. If I died or was declared mentally incompetent before turning 25, control of the company would pass to my mother as my next of kin. And my mother, I now understood, would do anything to get that control, either to run the company herself or to hand it over to Serena and Marcus. I needed to protect myself, but I also needed to wait. If I made my move too early, they'd adapt. I needed them to commit to a plan, to show their hand before I could counter effectively. So I played the long game. I worked hard at Hartley Industries, learning every aspect of the business. I made connections with our clients, our employees, our board members. I built a reputation as competent, thorough, and trustworthy. And I waited for my mother and Serena to make their move. It came on my 24th birthday. My mother threw a surprise party, the first birthday celebration she'd organized for me since I was 6 years old. I should have been suspicious immediately, but part of me, the part that was still that little girl desperate for her mother's love, wanted to believe she'd changed. The party was at our house, filled with family friends and business associates. Serena was there, looking beautiful in a designer dress. And there, smiling at me from across the room, was Marcus Chen. "He's single now," my mother whispered in my ear, "and he's been asking about you." Of course he had. In my previous timeline, we'd already been dating for 2 years by this point. He'd have his hooks in me, would be maneuvering himself into position to take over as CFO once I inherited. But in this timeline, I'd kept him at arm's length, had cost his family money, had given him no opening, so he was trying a different approach: persistence. "I'm not interested," I told my mother. "Don't be ridiculous. He's perfect for you. Successful, from a good family, handsome." "He's a thief," I said quietly. My mother's face went still. "What did you say?" "I know about the financial irregularities at his last position. I know why he was really fired." "Did you think I wouldn't do my research?" "Those were rumors," my mother hissed. "Nothing was ever proven." "Then he won't mind when I have our security team run a thorough background check before allowing him anywhere near Hartley Industries." I smiled sweetly. "I'm sure it will all come back clean." I walked away before she could respond, but I felt her fury like a physical weight. I'd rejected her plans for me twice now. First by refusing to meet Marcus, then by refusing to date him. She was running out of time. In less than a year, I'd inherit full control of Hartley Industries, and her window of opportunity would close forever. She was going to have to get creative. The first attempt came 2 months later. I started feeling sick at work, dizzy, nauseous, unable to concentrate. At first, I thought it was stress, but when I collapsed in a board meeting, Harold insisted I go to the hospital. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me. My blood work was normal, my vitals were stable, but I felt like I was dying. The symptoms would come and go randomly, always worst when I was at the office or at home. It took me 3 weeks to figure out what was happening. In my previous life, I died of a drug overdose. In this life, I was being poisoned. The realization came when I was having lunch at a restaurant downtown and felt perfectly fine, clear-headed, energetic, healthy. Then I went home for dinner with my mother and Serena, and within an hour, I was back to feeling dizzy and sick. I started testing my theory. I ate only food I prepared myself or bought from restaurants. Within days, my symptoms vanished. But when I accepted a cup of coffee from my mother's housekeeper, a woman who'd been loyal to my mother for 20 years, I was sick within the hour. They were poisoning me. Slowly, carefully, in doses small enough to avoid detection, but large enough to make me appear unstable, unreliable. They were building a case for my incompetence, my inability to run Hartley Industries. I could have confronted them, I could have called the police. But I had no proof. I'd never caught them in the act, and by the time I'd figured out what was happening, any evidence would be long gone. And more importantly, I wanted them to think it was working, so I started pretending. I let myself appear confused in meetings. I made small mistakes in reports. I showed up to the office looking exhausted and unwell, and I watched as my mother's campaign against me intensified. "She's not capable of running the company," I overheard her tell Harold one day. "Look at her, she can barely function. My husband would be devastated to see his daughter like this." Harold, to his credit, was skeptical. "She's been under a lot of stress," he said. "The transition period is difficult for anyone. Give her time." But time was exactly what my mother didn't want to give me. My 25th birthday was 4 months away. The second attempt was more direct. I came home one evening to find Serena in my apartment, the one I'd moved into after refusing to live at home anymore. She was crying, mascara streaming down her face. "I need your help," she sobbed. "Please, Elizabeth. I know we haven't been close, but you're my sister." Every instinct I had screamed at me to throw her out, but I needed to know what they were planning. "What's wrong?" "I'm pregnant," she whispered, "with Marcus's baby." And there it was, the play. In my previous life, Serena and Marcus had hidden their affair until after our marriage. In this life, with me refusing to date him, they were trying a different angle. Serena would claim to be pregnant with Marcus's child, they'd get married, and my mother would push for Marcus to have a role at Hartley Industries to support his new family. Once he was inside the company, he'd have access to everything he needed to start stealing. "Congratulations," I said flatly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Mom is going to be furious. She had such high hopes for you and Marcus, and now—" She trailed off, a calculated pause. "I need you to help me convince her this is a good thing. That Marcus is a good man. That he deserves a chance at Hartley Industries." "No," said simply. Her tears dried up instantly, replaced by cold fury. "No?" "You're not pregnant," I said. "You're lying. And even if you were, I wouldn't help you install your boyfriend as an executive at my company so he can rob me blind. You're paranoid," Serena spat. "Just like Mom said, you're sick, Elizabeth, unstable, you need help. Get out of my apartment." She left, but not before delivering one final threat. "Mom's going to have you declared incompetent. The board is already concerned about your health. How long do you think you'll last when she starts pushing for a medical review?" She was right. My mother had been building a case against me for months. My mystery illness, my declining performance, my social isolation. If she could get a doctor to declare me mentally unfit, she could petition the courts for control of my inheritance. I had 4 months to turn the tables completely. 4 months to gather evidence, to protect myself, and to destroy them so thoroughly they'd never threaten me again. It was time to stop playing defense. The first thing I did was hire a team of private investigators, not just one, but 5, each working independently so my mother couldn't bribe or threaten them. Their instructions were simple. Document everything. Every meeting between my mother, Serena, and Marcus. Every financial transaction. Every phone call, email, and text message they could legally access. The second thing I did was consult with a lawyer who specialized in trust and estate law. I needed to know exactly what my mother could and couldn't do, what rights I had, and how to protect myself. The third thing I did was talk to Harold. "I need to tell you something," I said, sitting in his office with the door closed. "And I need you to listen to everything before you respond." I told him about the poisoning, not speculation, but fact. I'd finally caught my mother's housekeeper on camera adding something to my coffee. I told him about Marcus's history, about his connection to Serena, about my mother's plans to have me declared incompetent. I showed him the evidence my investigators had gathered, bank statements showing unexplained transfers from my mother to Marcus, text messages between Serena and Marcus discussing their long game, photos of the 3 of them meeting secretly. Harold listened to everything, his expression growing darker by the minute. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother came to me last week," he finally said. "She wanted to schedule a board meeting to discuss your fitness to inherit. She brought a doctor's report claiming you were suffering from severe anxiety and possible dissociative disorder." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that unless you were actively psychotic or comatose, that decision wasn't hers to make. Your father's trust is ironclad. You inherit at 25, regardless of anyone's opinion of your mental state." He smiled grimly. "Your father knew your mother might try something like this. He built in protections." Relief flooded through me. "So I'm safe? From being declared incompetent?" "Yes. But that doesn't mean your mother won't try something else." He leaned forward. "Elizabeth, I've worked with your father for 20 years and with you for the past 3. I know you're capable of running this company, but I also know your mother, and she's dangerous when she doesn't get what she wants. I know, I said quietly. That's why I need your help. Together, Harold and I crafted a plan. We couldn't stop my mother from attempting to sabotage me, but we could control the narrative. We scheduled a comprehensive medical evaluation with 3 independent doctors, all of whom found me in perfect health. We had the company's security team do a routine sweep that discovered the recording devices my mother had planted in my office. We started quietly documenting every instance of her interference with company business, and we waited for her to make her final desperate move. It came 2 weeks before my 25th birthday. My mother called an emergency board meeting. She'd somehow convinced 3 of our 7 board members that I was unfit to inherit, and she wanted a vote to petition the courts for a delay in the trust transfer. It wouldn't change the outcome. My father's trust was too well constructed, but it would tie everything up in legal battles for years. But Harold and I had prepared for this. We called our own emergency board meeting for the same day, 1 hour earlier. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing at the head of the conference table. My mother wasn't there. She'd be arriving for her meeting in an hour, expecting to ambush me. "I've called you here today because I've become aware of a conspiracy to defraud Hartley Industries." I spent the next 45 minutes laying out everything: the poisoning, the planted recording devices, Marcus Chen's history of financial fraud, the affair between Marcus and Serena, the text messages discussing how they planned to bankrupt Hartley Industries and rebuild it under their control, the shell corporations my mother had already established in preparation for their plan. I showed them bank statements, emails, photos, and recordings. I showed them the doctor's reports proving I'd been poisoned. I showed them the falsified medical evaluation my mother had commissioned. By the time I finished, the board members who'd been prepared to vote against me looked physically ill. "What do you want us to do?" the board chair asked. "I want my mother removed from all company property immediately," I said. "I want a restraining order filed against her, Serena and Marcus Chen. And I want criminal charges filed for attempted fraud, poisoning, and corporate espionage." "Done," the board chair said. "Effective immediately, Catherine Ashford is banned from Hartley Industries premises and stripped of any remaining courtesy, privileges." We filed the criminal charges that afternoon. By the time my mother arrived for her board meeting, there were police waiting to arrest her. The look on her face when she saw me standing there with Harold and the board chair was something I'll remember forever. Shock, fury, and finally, fear. "You can't do this," she said. "I'm your mother." "No," I said quietly. "You stopped being my mother the first time you chose Serena over me. You stopped being my mother when you set me up with a man you knew was a criminal. You stopped being my mother when you tried to poison me." "I never saw us." "We have video evidence," Harold interrupted. "Your housekeeper gave a full statement in exchange for immunity. She explained exactly how you instructed her to add small doses of sedatives to Elizabeth's food and drink." My mother's face went white. "You have the right to remain silent," the police officer said, and I turned away as they read her rights. The trial took 8 months. My mother, Serena, and Marcus were all charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted poisoning, and corporate espionage. The evidence was overwhelming. My investigators had done their work well. Marcus cut a deal first, testifying against my mother and Serena in exchange for a reduced sentence. He got 5 years. My mother got 10. Serena, who had been less directly involved in the financial crimes, got 7. But the legal consequences were nothing compared to the social ones. The trial was public, and the details were salacious enough to make headlines. "Heiress nearly killed by mother and sister" ran in the Chicago Tribune. "Business fraud and family betrayal" was the Wall Street Journal's headline. Within weeks, everyone who mattered knew what they'd tried to do to me, and I used that social capital ruthlessly. I took over as CEO of Hartley Industries on my 25th birthday, as my father had intended. Under my leadership, the company flourished. I expanded into new markets, acquired 2 competitors, and tripled our revenue within 3 years. I became one of the youngest female CEOs in Chicago, and I used my platform to advocate for other women in business. I also became extremely wealthy. Not just comfortable, but genuinely, independently wealthy. Wealthy enough to never need anyone. Wealthy enough to build the life I'd always wanted. And I did it all with straight hair because every morning when I looked in the mirror, the sleek strands reminded me that I'd survived. I'd died and come back. I'd been beaten down and had risen up. The straightened hair wasn't about shame anymore, it was armor. It was a reminder that I'd chosen to change, to be strategic, to become someone they couldn't hurt. My curls had been my father's gift, but this new version of myself was my gift to me. The charity gala where I finally faced Marcus again was 3 years after the trial, 5 years after my rebirth. He'd served his sentence and been released on parole. Serena was still in prison, as was my mother. I'd known he might be there. The guest list was public, and I'd seen his name. Part of me wanted to avoid him, to maintain my perfect record of never seeing him again. But a larger part of me wanted this moment, wanted him to see exactly what I'd become. So I'd made sure my name was announced, made sure he'd know I was donating $50 million, more money than he'd tried to steal from me across both lifetimes combined. Made sure he'd see me standing on that stage in my designer gown with my straight hair, powerful and untouchable. After my speech, I mingled with donors and board members, accepting congratulations and discussing future projects. I felt Marcus watching me from across the room, but I didn't acknowledge him. He was nothing to me now, not even worth a glance. Finally, he approached. I'd known he would. Men like Marcus couldn't resist one last attempt at manipulation. "Elizabeth," he said, "you look different." "Do I?" I kept my voice polite but distant, the tone I'd use with any stranger. "Your hair," he said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "You straightened it." "Yes, I prefer it this way. But it was so beautiful before, so wild and free." I finally looked at him directly, and I let him see the coldness in my eyes. "You told me it was messy and unprofessional. You said I needed to look more put together. I took your advice." He flinched. "I never meant—" "Yes, you did." I smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "You meant every word. Just like you meant to steal from me. Just like you meant to destroy me with my sister. Just like you meant to take everything my father built and tear it apart." "I served my time," Marcus said quietly. "I paid for what I did." "Did you?" I tilted my head. "Because from where I'm standing, I paid far more. I paid with years of abuse. I paid with betrayal. In another life, I paid with my life itself." His face went pale. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just a metaphor. The point is, you took your shots, Marcus. You and Serena and my mother, and you all lost." I started to walk away, but he grabbed my arm, lightly, desperately. "Wait, please, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For all of it. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I am." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. "Let go of me." He did, immediately. "Your apology means nothing," I said quietly. "Because it's not about remorse, it's about the fact that you lost. If you'd won, if you'd successfully stolen my company and destroyed my life, you wouldn't be sorry at all, you'd be celebrating." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, and it was a harsh sound. "You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you about fair, Marcus. Fair is me standing here, successful and powerful, while you're scrambling to rebuild a life you destroyed with your own greed. Fair is Serena in prison, realizing that all her cruelty got her nothing. Fair is my mother dying alone in a cell, knowing her daughter wants nothing to do with her." "She's your mother," Marcus said. "Surely you could—" "She stopped being my mother when she tried to kill me," I interrupted. "And she stopped having any claim on my mercy when she chose Serena over me every single day of my life. I don't owe her anything. I don't owe any of you anything." I stepped closer, dropping my voice so only he could hear. "But I'll tell you what I did do. I ensured that every company in Chicago knows exactly what you tried to do. I made sure that every board, every investment group, every potential employer has access to the full details of your fraud case. I didn't need to blacklist you explicitly. I just made sure everyone knew the truth. His face went ashen. You're the reason I can't find work. I'm the reason you have to live with the consequences of your actions, I corrected. You made your choices, Marcus. You chose to steal. You chose to betray me. You chose to ally yourself with people who wanted to destroy me. Those choices have consequences. I'm sorry, he said again, and this time there were tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no pity. Just nothing. He was a ghost of a life I'd left behind. Goodbye, Marcus, I said. Don't ever approach me again. I walked away, and this time, he didn't follow. The epilogue to my story isn't about revenge. It's about the life I built after I stopped letting them define me. I ran Hartley Industries for another 10 years, growing it into a billion-dollar corporation. Then I sold it to a Fortune 500 company for an obscene amount of money and retired at 35 to focus on philanthropy. I never married. I never wanted to. The idea of trusting someone that completely again made my skin crawl. But I had friends, real friends, chosen family who loved me for who I was. I had a beautiful home, financial security, and the freedom to do whatever I wanted. I traveled the world. I funded scholarships for first-generation college students. I built a foundation in my father's name that supported women entrepreneurs. I lived exactly the life I wanted, on my own terms. My mother died in prison when I was 32. I didn't attend her funeral. Serena was released when I was 34, and she tried to contact me once, a letter asking for money and forgiveness. I returned it unopened. Marcus spiraled. Without the ability to work in finance or business, he took odd jobs and eventually left Chicago. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to Oregon and was working at a hardware store. He got married, had a kid, lived a small life. I felt nothing about it. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. He was simply irrelevant. On my 40th birthday, I did something I hadn't done since I was 21. I went to a salon and told them to cut off all the length and let my natural hair grow back. Are you sure? The stylist asked. This is years of treatments to remove. I'm sure, I said. It took 2 years for my curls to fully return. They were different than they'd been, coarser, more gray, shaped by age and experience. But they were mine. I stood in front of the mirror on my 42nd birthday, looking at myself with my natural curls for the first time in 2 decades, and I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was finally completely free. The curls weren't my armor anymore. The straight hair had served its purpose. It had reminded me every day of my rebirth, my second chance, my refusal to be their victim. But I didn't need that reminder anymore. I knew who I was. I knew what I'd survived. I knew what I'd built, and I knew that my father would have been proud. I kept a photo from that day in my office, me with my curls, gray streaks and all, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. It wasn't the polished, perfect image I'd cultivated for so long. It was just me, finally comfortable in my own skin. Marcus never saw those curls. My mother never saw them. Serena never saw them. They'd gotten the armored version of me, the one who'd straightened every curl and hardened every soft edge. The real me, wild curls and all, belonged to the life I'd built after them, the life where I was loved, valued, and free. And that, more than any revenge, was the sweetest victory of all. Years later, a young journalist writing a book about second-chance success stories reached out to interview me. She was fascinated by my story, how I'd overcome family betrayal to build an empire, how I'd turned attempted murder into a platform for advocacy. What would you say to other women facing similar situations? She asked. Women being undermined by their families or partners? I thought about it for a long time. I'd say that your survival is not revenge enough, I finally said. Your happiness is not revenge enough. You need to be so successful, so powerful, so completely thriving that they become irrelevant. Not forgotten, you'll never forget what they did, but irrelevant to your joy. And you achieved that? I achieved more than that, I said. I achieved peace. One last question, she said. The hair. Everyone wants to know about the hair. Why did you straighten it, and why did you eventually go back to curls? I smiled. I straightened it because I needed to become someone new, someone they couldn't hurt. And I went back to curls because I finally became someone who didn't care what they thought. The article came out 6 months later with the headline, "The Heiress Who Rose from Ashes, Elizabeth Hartley's Story of Betrayal and Triumph." It was picked up by major news outlets, turned into a podcast, and eventually optioned for a limited series. I didn't need the publicity, I'd already won. But I hoped that somewhere there was a girl with curly hair being told she was messy, unprofessional, not good enough. I hoped she'd read my story and understand that she could straighten her hair if she wanted to, or keep her curls if she wanted to. But either way, she should never let anyone else make that choice for her. Your hair is your crown, your choices are your power, and your success is the best revenge. But your peace is everything. As for Marcus, Serena, and my mother, they got exactly what they deserved. Marcus lived a small, unremarkable life, forever known as the man who'd tried to steal from and betray a woman who'd only ever loved him. Serena spent her best years in prison and emerged to a world that remembered her only as a villain. My mother died alone, abandoned by both her daughters, the stepdaughter she'd sacrificed everything for and the biological daughter she'd tried to kill. I didn't cause their destruction. They did that themselves. I just made sure the world knew the truth. And then I went back to living my beautiful, successful, peaceful life, with my curls wild and free, exactly as my father had always loved them. The last time Marcus saw me, I had straight hair and was standing on a stage, powerful and untouchable. But the woman I became after that, the one with wild curls and genuine joy, he never got to see. And that was exactly how it should be.